Good morning and welcome. Good morning. Thank you all so much for being here this morning. We're incredibly excited about this event and this partnership with Athena40. I'm Bill Maurer. I'm the Dean of the School of Social Sciences here at UC Irvine. And on behalf of my school and UCI, welcome to campus if you're visiting. And thank you all so much for being here and for your support. I know there's a number of community members here who have really stepped up to help us advance the mission of the university and also to put on events like this. And I'm just very, very, very grateful for your support and all of your encouragement when we do things like this that sometimes feel a little bit like, wow, we're going to do this giant thing. Will it work? Of course it will. Here we are. So thank you all. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Professor Catherine Bolzendahl. Professor Bolzendahl is in the Department of Sociology. She's an award-winning author on changing definitions of the American family, as well as gender, leadership, and politics. She's published widely in sociology and in political science journals. And really, this event is kind of her brainchild. She nurtured and grew this thing and said, let's just do it. And here we are. So Professor Bolzendahl will be introducing each speaker and will be moderating this morning's conversation. And she'll also tell you a little bit about how this event fits into a worldwide series of events that is also taking place this day. Please join me in welcoming Professor Bolzendahl.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming here. We couldn't have done this without the support of Dean Maurer, financially and emotionally. I would like to call out on this day that we are honoring International Women's Day that Dean Maurer was recognized 2 years ago with the Dynamic Women of UCI Award for eliminating the pay gap in the School of Social Sciences. So as we know, women's leadership is a global priority. Recent years have seen dramatic gains in women's social, political, and economic leadership. Yet simultaneously, nowhere in the world do women hold equal power to men in influencing and exercising authority worldwide. So reflecting the recent gains we've seen, but also the resilient barriers, the United Nations has declared women's empowerment as its third Millennium Development Goal and gender equality as the fifth of its Sustainable Development Goals. In light of these issues and in honor of International Women's Day 2020, the UCI School of Social Sciences has partnered with the Athena40 initiative, which was launched by the international nonprofit Global Thinkers Forum. Athena40 is the first ever global selection of the top 40 forward-thinking women who create positive change in their societies and industries and also support other women and girls to thrive. We at UCI Social Science share its commitment to enabling women to contribute to our economies, promoting partnerships and ideas exchange among women and men worldwide, and embracing diversity as a continuous source of talent and knowledge. Our conversation here today will join similar conversations all over the world. Our partner cities include Athens, Amman, Beirut, Johannesburg, Istanbul, Karachi, and London. Please allow me to briefly introduce our panelists, but I encourage you to look up their full profiles on the event website. We have Dr. Stephanie McClellan. She is the Chief Medical Officer for TIA Women's Health and a physician at Hoag Hospital. She is a hormone expert and the author of So Stressed, the ultimate stress relief plan for women, which I'm going to buy very soon. As TIA's Chief Medical Officer and the first practicing gynecologist at the TIA Clinic, Dr. McClellan has architected an innovative care model that blends conventional gynecology and primary care with wellness practitioners who bring a 360-degree view of women's health. Thank you for coming.
Yay.
We also welcome Susan B. Parks, who is the president and CEO of Orange County United Way. Parks has a long history with the organization, including as one of the founding members of the Orange County United Way Women's Philanthropy Fund. Under Ms. Parks' leadership, the organization launched United to End Homelessness, an an initiative committed to end homelessness in Orange County in a dignified and humane way by providing needed housing and support services. Welcome, Ms. Parks. We also welcome Carrie Phelan, who is the former president of Global Franchise Management at Lionsgate. Prior to joining Lionsgate, Ms. Phelan led projects and teams across a variety of major entertainment companies, including DreamWorks Animation, Pixar, and Lucasfilms and Lego Systems. In all of these roles, she created and led brand extensions spanning location and live-based entertainment venues, consumer products, licensed merchandise, brand partnerships, and an array of promotional ventures. Welcome.
Thank you.
Dean Song Richardson is the Dean of UCI's and Dean and Chancellor's Professor of the UCI Law School. That's a mouthful. She is the leading expert on the impact of implicit racial and gender biases in a variety of contexts, including emerging technologies. She has won numerous awards and recognitions, including the American Association of Law Schools Derek Bell Award, named one of the top women lawyers in California by the Daily Journalist, and chosen as one of the 2 most influential Korean Americans in Orange County. Welcome, Dean Richardson. We have Congresswoman Loretta Sanchez, who is a former member of the U.S. House of Representatives. She's represented our county from 1997 to 2017 and has been a staunch advocate for higher education. Among her many, many accomplishments, she was an original co-sponsor of the nation's largest education bill since World War II, the Post-9/11 Veterans Educational Act of 2008. She directed billions of dollars annually from the federal defense budget to fund basic research at universities, including funding graduate student research. Her work has enabled UCI both to start the Beckman Institute and the Mine Institute. Welcome, Representative Sanchez. So I have a variety of questions that I'm going to pose to our panelists. And the first, which I would like each of you to respond to, please, is what does women's leadership mean to you? How do you define it? And do you think there are misconceptions that need to be brought down?
I can kick it off.
Go.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, they told me I'm in the chair 1, so I figured maybe I should kick off. But I would just start by saying great leadership is great leadership. And I've benefited from a lot of great leaders throughout my journey and my career, and I feel very privileged and honored to have done that. But I don't think great leadership is defined by gender. With that said, I will say that I do think men and women do have different leadership styles. And I've seen that in my own career. And I love to characterize women's leadership as kind of whole brain thinking. They use both their hard skills and their soft skills, or their IQ and their EQ, emotional intelligence. And, it's well documented and it's been proven time and time again that, when you look at great leadership traits, regardless of which study you look at, whether it's McKinsey or some of the Harvard Business Review stuff, that women outperform men on the EQ dimensions in particular, but also on a lot of the hard skills. And that's why I think it's such a travesty that we don't have more women in, great leadership positions. Because there's very proven benefits to having them in those roles, and it's critically important. So I'll pass it over to some of my colleagues here to comment.
I'll go since I'm number 2. So I teach a class, actually, Women in Leadership at Chapman University, when I decide I want to be tied down for a semester in Orange County. And I just finished up a fellowship, being the Advanced Leadership Fellow at Harvard University. So I've been doing a lot of work on leadership, especially with respect to women. And I also saw a big difference in leadership between men and women and their skill set and how they used it when I was in the United States Congress, of course, for 20 years, because it's totally guys, except for a few women. And I will have to tell you that I think that they come from 2 completely different arenas. Men walk into a room, at least in the Congress, men walk into a room already having decided what it is that they're going to do. And then it's just a matter of sitting down and telling us what they're going to do. And, if someone says, we're going to have a meeting, we're going to discuss what we're going to do about, I don't know, the crisis of coronavirus, right? The guys already will walk in, they've already decided what they're going to do, and they're going to just start pushing it on us. Right? And the women actually think we're going to a meeting where we're actually going to discuss and exchange ideas and figure out what's going on. And maybe someone's going to come up with some bright brainstorm or something. And there we go. Right? And I'm generalizing, but pretty much that's really the way that it goes. So I think when I look at a good woman leader, I would have to tell you, regardless of your politics, I think one of the best leaders that I ever got to work under was Nancy Pelosi. Okay? Nancy Pelosi, first of all, just on a numerical scale, put more women in positions to head committees, to do special task forces. She empowered women. She placed women before where we never were, and it continues to happen so in the Congress under her leadership. But I think the more important thing that I saw was when she would lead, it would be a circular lead. In other words, turn your chairs this way and let's discuss what we need to discuss, which was very different than the top down of this is what we're going to do, you guys. And so I think women just have a different way of leading and a more inclusive way of leading, and they listen. They tend to listen a lot more, I think, than they tend to talk. Generalizing.
My husband would probably say I talk more than listen. When it comes to him. I agree with what has been said. I think leadership for me will have accomplished what I dream of when we stop talking about gender in such polarized way. And when you read the neuroscience on brain processing, you can take a man and a woman, experience a stress at the same moment. In this case, something very gender neutral, sticking your hand in ice water. That's not a cultural thing. The human body doesn't like to be too cold or too hot. What's really fascinating about these studies is they show that gender perception is not volitional. It's hardwired. And to your point, I think when women look at data, they are using unintentionally very different pathways of processing that data than men are. And I think that we're going to have real progress when we stop looking at the either or, this binary kind of way of analyzing who's better leader, and because both styles, if you look at it from, in my opinion, from a anthropologic evolutionary point of view, they had merit. They were intended to be different but collaborative for the collective whole.
Yeah, and I'm going to follow up on what Stephanie was just saying, and the other folks on the panel, in that my experience is you need both to really make an organization effective, right? You need both styles. We need to be strong enough to ask if some people aren't listening to get back in the present and be there and listen if those folks aren't paying attention. Those folks, I guess I'm saying men, but if they're not paying attention, and to be heard. I think that's so important. And I don't know how many of you, hopefully many of you know that some of the best research on this topic started here at UCI with Dr. Judy Rose Nur. Does everybody know Judy? Yeah. I mean, UCI, give yourself a credit that UCI brought this amazing woman who I think until her 50s was a housewife, and then became a professor, went through school and wrote the seminal article on leadership back in 1990 that got published by the Harvard Business Journal. on the difference between men and women's leadership. So in preparation, I did do a little bit. I looked at it this morning again to see if it was still relevant. She talked about the command and control style of men and the interactive style of women. That was in 1990. So hopefully we've made progress, right? And I think there's progress, and we'll probably talk more about that. But her ending is that you need both. You need both, in society, and that it's wonderful that it's validated through science, to really make us all operate at whatever level at our best. So whether it's a community level, which I'm looking at now, or in a company or a small business or a family, we all thrive when we have different perspectives come together. But all of that started here. So if you don't know Judy, go Google her afterwards, because she's pretty amazing. She's amazing.
That's great.
So what does women's leadership mean to me? First, before I answer that question, I just want to thank all of you for being here, and thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this incredible conversation with my incredible fellow panelists. So as I was listening to everyone speak, I realized how complicated that question is for me to answer. It's complicated for a number of reasons. Given my own research in unconscious racial and gender bias, and when we think about intersectionality, and because women of different genders, races, ethnicities, we all bring something different to the table. And while I know, having become a dean of a law school, that there are perceptions of me that I just can't control, and there are ways in which I will act that are influenced by what society puts on me. And so when I think about what women's leadership means, I agree that I would love to get to a time when we don't need to have this discussion, because leaders are leaders, and I feel that way. And yet we cannot escape the fact that given the culture in which so many of us have experienced our lives and grown up in, it is hard to talk about women's leadership without being stereotypical about it. And that is difficult for me, because it's true. Women are collaborative, women listen, women might talk a lot more than men. And by the way, I also want to be cognizant of gender identity. And so I'm using the term women because that's what we're using, but I am also cognizant of the ways in which we should now pay attention to our gender identities. But frankly, people will see me, regardless of whether they know what my gender identity is, and make judgments about me. And so as a woman, as a leader, I think what women do well now, what we have to do is hold two contrary thoughts in our minds at the same time. Because we know how people will view us, we know how we view ourselves, and we know how it is that we're constantly thinking, I am anyway, how I should navigate myself in particular environments. So being a woman and being a woman leader means that we constantly have to think about that. Am I being too aggressive, or am I being too weak? Am I saying what I need to say, and will people be angry with me, or will they understand? How do they compare me to the prior dean at the law school who fit the stereotypical view of what we think of, right, as a law professor? And I love Erwin Chemerinsky. He is my mentor. He is my friend, right? But he does things differently than I do, of necessity. And so when we think about women's leadership and what it means to be a woman and what it means to be a leader, I think it's complicated. And I do think we have much more going on. So we are, of course, more talented. I'm just kidding. No, but we do. We have to navigate much more. And I think men are starting to have to navigate much more too in the world and the time in which we are living. So thank you for that question.
Thank you so much. The answers, and that's a nice segue into our next question, because thinking about these qualities that you've all highlighted, if you think about your own experiences and you think about some of these societal limitations and opportunities, could you identify perhaps one or two of the major both challenges but also opportunities in a positive way that will improve equality, gender equality in leadership?
Well, for me, I think one of the biggest challenges is, what everyone here has been touching on, which is kind of this unconscious bias in hiring and promoting women. And it it's a real thing. And I've seen it throughout my career. There's no malice in it. There's no malintent. But there is an unconscious bias. It's very well documented. And so I think that's one of the biggest challenges. And what that requires is, as you were saying, changing mindsets, changing organizational mindsets, to think about hiring and promoting differently. And then also, I think also even women have to change their mindsets. One of the things that has been talked about a lot is, women opting out, taking themselves off the track, leaving and not pursuing, higher level positions for a myriad of reasons. But in my experience, I haven't really seen that. I have seen a lot of amazing women continue to charge the hill, and still not quite get to where they want to go. And so I think it's still, there's this internal bias that is still very prevalent, and whether it's hidden or overt, can be debated. But I think changing the mindsets. And so there's a lot of talk about bias training, similar to how we mandated sexual harassment training years ago. Couldn't we be more proactive in kind of taking some of this bias training and making sure that we're identifying, like you're saying, keeping this dual mindset and asking ourselves both sides of the coin? Because it is true that, women are big. There are big benefits to having women in leadership. And I agree, we need both. But, we're a far cry from 50% of senior leadership positions in this country. I think we're still in the single digits. I don't know. I didn't do enough homework, right. I guess. But, it's, there are baby steps, there are bright spots, but, we do need both. But women bring a different perspective, a different point of view. They are more collaborative. They're better communicators. There's a lot of things that they bring to the table. And, I was reading a study recently that said, companies that really prioritize innovation, where, you're reading about it every day. There's all this disruptors in my industry, in the entertainment industry. The industry is completely being disrupted by, the streamers, Netflix and, Amazon and Apple and, everybody. Nobody was even going to a movie theater anymore. It's hard to get people into theaters because they're consuming content in a very different way. The whole industry is upside down, trying to figure this out. And it's proven time and time again that when you have women in your senior leadership ranks, that the bottom line and the average growth and the average return on investment is higher when there are women in the senior leadership ranks, especially in companies that are prioritizing innovation and transformation. So,
but it is true that a lot of it is institutionalized, whether we realize it or not. I mean, we have only to look at the Democratic, the people who are left in the Democratic real run for the nomination tender to see how it's going to play out. How it's going to play out is most likely there's not going to be a woman that's nominated. And that's very institutionalized, and that's a whole discussion on its own. But, when I look at things, I see it so institutionalized. When I was in the House of Representatives, I was the highest ranking woman ever on the military committee, and I went for the top spot. And I lost a guy who's very smart and who's doing a good job, but, he had never shown up to any of the committee meetings, for years and years. And all of a sudden we have this runoff and, I lost by 6 votes. And one of my friends said to me, and it was a guy, and he said, Loretta, he goes, who did you think you were? Being a woman and trying to get the chairmanship of the most macho committee in the Congress. It's very institutionalized, And so I'll end with this. So we don't even realize it is. The Pentagon had a rule that said women could not be in combat.
Right.
Okay? Now, anybody knows, at least when I went to business school, and I have an MBA, that one of the unwritten rules is you want to be in the line of whatever your company is doing. If you're making cars, have a profit and loss center of making cars. That's one of the ways to get to CEO. You're probably not going to make it to CEO if you're the HR person. It's direct line. It's not staff. And so what's the number one job of our military? It's combat. I mean, we don't want it to go there, but if we need it, we turn them on and they're a combat machine. And yet, we're not letting women be in combat. So how are women supposed to get promoted in the military? Right? Because the military is a pyramid scheme. Y'all start out here, and the more you go up, the more you go up. There's the top guy, and there's a few guys, and there's a few guys, and then there's the peons, right? That's the way it is. So we can be down here, but how do we get to there? Especially if we don't get to combat. And it's tough. I mean, you come up for review against your peers. So there's, the 5 of us and only one slot. And all of these are guys and I'm the woman. And they've all had combat experience and I haven't. So who's going to get promoted? Right? And here's the thing. Our women were in combat anyway. Our first POW in the Iraq War, Jessica Lynch, right? She wasn't in combat. She was taking supplies up to the front line. Guess what? They got ambushed. She had to use her gun. It jammed, and everybody else's, but, she got taken as a POW. Tell me that's not combat. We have to pull out your gun and somebody's shooting at you. Right? But when we finally got her back and she had her little list of everything she'd done in the military, she was not in combat. She was not allowed to be in combat. Right? So one of the number one things I focused on when I was on that military committee was to allow women to be in combat units. And when I first brought it up, snickers and stares and, size and everything goes Loretta with her woman thing. I think there were 4 women on the committee of 53 at the time. Until finally we got women in combat. And it's so funny because I sat in Afghanistan with the Special Forces guys, and we already got women in combat going. The military and us trying to decide each of the services. The Marines even said, oh, "Okay, yes, if the women can meet the standards of what it takes, we're going to let them be." And I'm sitting across from these special ops guys, McChrystal and his gang. In Afghanistan, and I bring up the "how you doing on the women in combat" thing, right? And they're like, And finally, one colonel looks at me and he goes, "Well, ma'am, might be okay for the other services, but certainly can't be a special operations person." And I'm like, "Well, why can't it be special ops?" And he's like, "Well, can you imagine this? We're in close quarters sometimes for a week or two in some, ungodly place, maybe little one room place we're holed up, and you gotta go shit and everything, and we shit in front of each other and everything. And you think a woman's gonna want to shit in front of us?" I mean, that's what he said. And I looked at him, I said, "You know what? I think if she's gotten to that point, she's probably already figured out she's going to have to shit in front of you guys sometime." Really? That's your excuse for not letting women be in combat? I mean, so it's institutionalized. We've got to change it.
I think we could end with that, right? I don't really know how to follow that, to your point.
Now you know how much fun Congress was for me.
The anthropologic data supports inculcated misogyny in Homo sapiens, and we talk about it and laugh about it, and it's been analyzed deeply by people far more thoughtful and talented than I, and I agree with the conclusion that misogyny is some kind of signaling defect in humans, in the Y chromosome, and it is, we're getting to a tipping point where it cannot be tolerated much longer, and I think we have to expose it for what it is. I mean, these issues of women and power and equality are ancient. There isn't recorded history in the world where this issue has not been either overtly or covertly exposed. And we've had great leaders, women, But again, we hold them up as the oddity, the rarity, the exception, not the potential of the every woman. And I think we need to expose this dialogue in that context. It isn't new. It's very old. And we have to start to unravel it, I think, on these kind of fundamental, because I know my husband says, try and standpoint. It isn't a Western problem. This has been documented in virtually every culture that's ever been recorded. So it is a deeply entrenched problem, but I am optimistic that as neuroscience and the science of cognition and the science of perception and bias, as we can now elevate this discussion to that level, I think there's real hope. And again, to be reiterative, I want us to stop looking at it as an either or. Men are this, women are this, because we know that's not true. And the human brain is capable of a continuum and a spectrum of processing and therefore response and execution. I don't know if that was a good follow to you, but
none of us would be able to follow Loretta. I mean, my gosh.
Sorry, I will leave now.
No. So, I'm going to build a little bit on what Loretta said at the beginning of her comments, and that I really do feel, and again, when you introduced me, I have a long history. I have been around a long time, so I'll use that as a framework. For many, many years, I rose up corporate ladders, and I rose up relatively quickly, and the reason was I was in line from day one. I started in sales. I knew how to talk to customers. I knew how to deal with people. I had real life experience, and the results were on paper. They were factual, what I delivered, right? And so as I went up and had P&Ls and all of that, it made it a little bit less than about a gender thing, because there's data. And so again, depending on what your aspirations are to get up to the ladder, realize that difference between line and staff. And I never thought about it in the military, but I will now. But that was a big key to me rising up quickly. When I first had so these are just stories, but so I rose up and I was recruited in as my first big officer role at a corporation. And I was so excited. And I was going to work for a woman. I had never worked for a woman. And I thought, this is going to be like an amazing experience. But she had come out of the time where I think Judy was writing about that command and control. And I think, had decided that was her ticket to success because it was all she had viewed. And she was so challenging to work with. And she thought I was too nice. And I had that moniker that whole time, right? That she's nice. And I'm thinking, when did that turn bad? I grew up in the Midwest, but I was nice. I hope I'm still nice. But anyway, that was it. And in a follow-up of that, it was a really big challenge. And when you have a different aspect of that, of a style being thrown at you. And so I adapted, I worked it through and all of that. And I ended up getting promoted and working for somebody else. So that worked out. To some satisfaction later, as a side note, she was once written up in USA Today as being one of the worst bosses in America. And I hope she's not listening. Well, maybe I hope she's listening. But anyway, it was like a really interesting thing that some of these characteristics. And so what it actually made me question, she had gotten to this very, very senior role about, do I need to adopt more of that style in my next role? And I tried it. And it was so not authentic to me. So that would be one of the things that I would say in terms of, if I had said line versus staff, where you want to go, and to be authentic to yourself, because at some point it's going to be felt by the people around you. And I went home every night, even though I was doing well, I went home stressed. Should have had your book. I was stressed. It wasn't me. And so finding that balance of your style, I think takes some time and experience. But there is nothing like having that experience, right? And you can't expect to start off and just be at the top, right? At least not in my experience, right? You have to have some of these along the way and kind of learn and adapt as you move forward. And I think there's been great strides in certain things, not certainly in corporate America. And I think I don't know if this is correct, but in the little bit of research I did, maybe it was like there are now 33 women CEOs, something like that, of Fortune 500 companies. But women are thriving as small business owners.
Yes.
And there's so many amazing stories of women. And so I think that is inspiring. Women don't get as much VC money, so that's something to work at, right? But the opportunity in terms of forming your own path and develop a culture that fits you and your style, that's very bright right now. And I'd say in the nonprofit sector, quite frankly, we probably could use more men if anyone are out there. But there are a number of things, like if your mission is to help improve humanity and other things, there are different segments that have gotten a little faster, probably not politics and probably not corporate America, but there are some other bright spots.
So I agree with aspects of everything that's already been said on the stage. And as I reflect more on what some of the challenges are, as well as the opportunities, I think someone mentioned this already, although didn't phrase it in this way, but it struck me when you were speaking, is that as women leaders, we are both visible and invisible at the same time. And so, what do I mean by that? We're very visible when we're out there, and there's a risk then of subtyping. And what I mean by that is if you have a view of who a woman is and how she should act and who she should be within this role, and you are different from that, then it is remarked upon. And if you are different from the stereotype of what we imagine women should be in these leadership roles, it serves to solidify the stereotype of who women should be if you don't fit that stereotype. So in that way, we're both visible and invisible. Another way in which we're invisible, and I'm going to talk about actually this stage right now, because I think one of the conversations I had with one of my fellow panelists, and something that's always on my mind, and I bet most men don't think about this, and I forgot to ask this time. I always wonder, what will the stage look like? Can I wear a skirt? Or should I wear pants? And so as I was walking in, actually, I was a little dismayed because I had worn a skirt and we're sitting in front of a room on a stage, sitting in, so I feel very uncomfortable. So I'm actually going to sit like this. But I remember that because I remember being on a panel up in Northern California with two men and me. And it was a very comfortable, conversational situation just like this. And yet I was very uncomfortable. I had to sit on the edge of my seat the whole time. I had my jacket off, draped over my legs, and they're all back and comfortable and talking, and I'm sitting like this, which might make people think I'm uncomfortable, because I was, not because of what I was saying, but because I'm thinking to myself as I'm trying, sorry, my earpiece is coming off my ear. As I'm trying to think about what am I going to say, I'm also thinking about I am very uncomfortable. And this is, so one of the challenges, again, I think for us is it would be great if the situation were normalized for us, if we were not forgotten, if we weren't an afterthought, if research that was done also focused on the ways in which women genetically, right, biologically are different in particular ways. Heart attacks, right? We know that. We know the studies of heart attacks now, right? It was based on the male model, not the female model. We have different symptoms, so we die more, right? It's things like that. I would love it. There's an incredible book, the title of which I cannot remember right now, unfortunately. It was studying women across the world and looking at the different ways that policies change, that medicine changes, that all sorts of fields change when you begin to focus on women and the way women move around in the world. And so the challenge is, again, we're both visible and invisible. The opportunity is there is constantly, more so probably today than in the past, more attention on us. And that provides us a lot more opportunities, a lot more opportunities for us in leadership, a lot more opportunities to reach out, take advantage of opportunities. So I'm speaking to the women now because there are studies out there that demonstrate that if women only meet, or if women meet every single criteria for a job, especially in leadership, we do not apply for them. If men meet 1 or 0, they apply, right? So the opportunities are there now in ways that they weren't before. And I want to encourage all of you women to just apply. I tell you, I look at so many CVs now all the time, and I want you to apply because others are. And just put yourself out there and take advantage of the opportunities that exist, because we need more of us so we can start changing the structures that people are talking about, the institutional changes that are necessary so that we can be who we are as leaders, right? And move up in whatever industry we happen to work in. Thanks.
Before you do your next question, I just wanted to comment on both of these comments. I, like Sue, had spent too many years as an early doctor trying to behave like the boys. And I was so unhappy and thinking, I'm just not a good man. And try as I might, just never worked. But I do think you made a very potent point. Women are realistic and they pivot and pivot quickly and pivot thoughtfully. And I think part of what we're seeing in women saying, forget it. I'm not going to beat my head against the proverbial glass ceiling in corporate America. I'm going to start my own company. And I think that is where we're going to see the change. I think the very institutionalized entities, whether it's politics or the military or very big Fortune 500 companies, they're going to be threatened in the way that the British Empire was by these ragtag Americans who had real determination. I obviously just saw the Netflix thing on George Washington, so that's why that's in my mind. But I say to women, define your dream and go for it. Mm-hmm. And you don't need permission, whether it's applying somewhere, go for it. Mm-hmm. But then don't whine. It's going to be hard. It's going to be really hard. And, when I felt...
Or whine to your friends.
Or your
behind closed doors.
Wine.
Yeah, but if you whine too much, you don't have friends left. So, you just got to plow through it.
You have to go for it, and whatever that means to you. And I think young women, I work with millennials at TIA, and
good luck to you.
I know. But I'll tell you, after getting over the shock of the way they think, I admire it, because I have spent a life trying to be not too much, to your point. Is this the right outfit? Is it too much? Is it serious enough? Is it not? It's
Yes.
like my husband says to me, don't you exhaust yourself by the time you have coffee? Yes, because you're always navigating. But the young millennial women, I am amazed by how quickly the metric has shifted. And I want to tell just one story. I was telling it earlier when my son, our oldest son, went to Harbor Day School here in Newport Beach. He came home in first grade very upset with me and asked me why I had been lying to him. And I'm thinking, the Easter Bunny, Santa Claus, the Tooth Fairy, which lie are we talking about? And the lie was, according to his friends on the playground, how silly are you to believe your mom is a doctor? Mm. She is a nurse. She's not a doctor.
Wow.
Fast forward, we have 4 little granddaughters and a grandson. And one of our granddaughters, who is so effusive about everything, she calls me Nia. She said, Nia, you won't believe it. I said, what? She went to the doctor for maybe strep throat, and she comes back. She didn't care about that. You will not believe it. There is a man who is a doctor.
That is awesome.
I said, I don't believe it. You're right. So I think it is changing.
That's great.
Oh my goodness, that's wonderful.
That's
and that is a great segue into thinking about, and maybe this time we'll start with song and go around that direction because you can speak from the UCI perspective. We know that women earn the majority of university degrees, yet are still underrepresented in top companies. What can we do here at UCI to bridge the gap and help the younger generation succeed in business and society?
Wow, you had to start with me.
Yeah, you have to represent UCI well.
Yes, sure. What can we do to increase the number of women in leadership positions, essentially, right?
Right. So
Yes.
they're getting these university degrees
Mhm.
and we're not seeing the same gains.
Yep.
So how do we get our anteaters out there and really reaping those gains?
So the reason I'm hesitating is the answer is so complicated. So I'll speak just generally from the big picture perspective first. And someone had already mentioned this. We need to think about not how do we help individual women who are graduating from college, which we do need to think about, but the bigger piece is the systems, the incentives, the structures that we have in place. That is what can truly make the difference. So, and that requires then all of us, and I think that we have been paying a lot of attention to this at UCI, but it requires all of us who are in these leadership positions to find out what are those structural barriers that don't translate from people getting their degrees to getting these positions within companies. So we can educate our students. We can serve as role models because that's so critically important to see people who look like us in positions like that. We have to then be comfortable enough to apply to those positions after we graduate. So there's some things that we can do systematically on an institutional level at the university. But the problem exists beyond us. That is the issue, right? Because we're graduating with more degrees. What happens between the time that we graduate and then when we go out into the workforce? What is it that is keeping us from living up to our full potential? So what can UCI do about that piece? We should also be out there making connections to the world beyond us, talking and using our research as we go into companies, into hospitals, into the education field, into nonprofits, into business. We need to use our capital in that way because something is happening once we graduate. And that is the systemic problem, the societal problem that we face here. How do we deal with the structural, institutional, unconscious biases that exist outside of UCI? And I think many of us, if not all of us on this stage, spend time doing that. And all of you, right? I feel like we're up here, but you're experts here in the audience too, right? So I think each of us needs to ask ourselves, what are we doing? What steps are we taking in the industries, in the fields in which we work to make those institutional, structural, and systemic changes in our institutions so that we provide opportunities for all the remarkable women who are graduating from UCI?
I think, it's so incumbent on us to really work that between school and the corporate or the other world. Again, one of the reasons why, women needed to have combat so they could move up. When we could move up, we could have more generals. When generals and colonels leave the military, they're usually the ones asked to run, not asked to go in and be, the fundraiser for the organization or the No, to run the organization. If you look at the CEOs, most of them, the Anglo males, have military in their background because it's like a brotherhood, so I kept saying the more women generals we have, then when they get out into the world, or colonels, and they get out into the world and we can place them in companies and things will begin to change. The other thing I also said was we had a real problem in the military and still continue to do, but not as much as we had before, on this whole sexual assault by military men on military women. Well, if you don't have women in the top rungs of the organization, how are you really going to fix that problem? Because it's a cultural problem. It's a military culture problem, right? So the more women we get up to the top, the better it is. But that's a separate issue. But this whole issue of, who do we have placed out in the world, for us to be able to make sure that we have a place to go. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons why we see this investment. I think it's a little bit too much, but in the whole STEM thing, right? Oh, we need more women in STEM. Oh, we need more women in computers. We need more women in physics. We need more women in science. Well, I have a mathematics background, so, I don't have a problem with that. But, this whole thing that, we need more women in there. And yes, we do, because when we see the new companies, the Googles and all of this, they're really about all of this math and science going on. So it's true. We need to ensure that we plug them into these organizations, but they also get burned out pretty fast. I mean, I work with all the high-tech companies. That's what I do now. I'm spreading the love of green around the world and everything. And there aren't women up in the upper echelons because they either come in and they get burned out, or they don't have the mentoring that goes on that needs for them to move up. So it's imperative among the women who have already made it to be able to figure out how we're going to do this. And, for the men who are in this room, you are very enlightened men to be sitting here with us today and to be listening to some of this thing. Mm-hmm. But, men are, I don't blame guys. I don't blame guys. Look, think about us. Just think about you as a person. If you need to go and do something, are you going to take somebody that's unknown with you to go and do it, or are you going to get one of your best girlfriends to go with you? Right? I mean, we all hang out with the people we hang out with because we like them, because we trust them, because we see the world more or less in the same way, because our kids, whatever. So men have just been doing what has been normal for them to do. They have their buddies and they know them. There's a position that comes open. Let's put them in there. They don't stop and think and say, oh, I don't have women in here and I don't have a Latina. Where's Loretta Sanchez? I need her here. They just don't stop and do that. They call through their mind and they're in their list of their friends or their acquaintances. I had in my first marriage, my father-in-law was number 2 guy over at an owner of Kroll Weedon, which is a white shoe, old-fashioned, great investment banking company, right? He was the head of all retail. So he would, hire all the stockbrokers and everything, right? Thousands of people over the 30 years he was doing there or whatever. He never had a woman stockbroker. Actually, he never even had a minority stockbroker. And then I married his son and had these kind of talks over the Thanksgiving table. Oh, what the heck? How come they're all white guys at your firm? Right? And he said, and he stopped to think about it, and he said to me, Loretta, no one has ever walked through my front door and asked me for a job that was a minority or a woman. He didn't have government business or anything, so he didn't have to do affirmative action plans or anything like that. It's just, he hadn't had it, the people he hired were people who walked in, and who knew what a stockbroker was. Who knew about investments, who knew about 401k plans. What does that mean? It usually means people who have them themselves. So it's not going to be a minority. And it's probably not going to be a woman most of the time, at least historically speaking. Okay, now we're smarter, we've got more, we get, So I don't blame them. But that just means that we need to be talking to our own friends, to our own guy friends, and explaining what the world is about, that there's income in women's hands, right? That there's brains and, that women have brains too. I mean, we need to educate them too. It's incumbent upon us to do that for them, because a lot of times they're just trying to make the bottom line in whatever their business is. They're over here doing their thing. They're not out here, sitting here in the audience, usually with us, hearing what we have to say. So I think it's part of everything that we have to do.
But I think implicit in your question is, and in your answer, we have these amazing academic institutions. I mean, UCI is impressive on so many levels and has reached these levels of preeminence in such a really short period of time. And I think that there still is a little bit of a siloed reality, meaning what the students experience in their academic cloisters, and now they go out into the world. And I think those bridge opportunities need to be strengthened, where all the leaders in the universities have authentic pathways of transition for these very educated, talented, motivated students. And I just remember coming out of medical school and residency thinking, I'm really smart. Now, 30 years later, I question that and realize how on so many days I was lucky. And this kind of, you've done this residency in this very grueling place and you're totally equipped. Go out and do it. And I believed that and realized that there was some truth in there, but there were a lot of gaps in basic things in how to be a doctor in a private setting versus in this very structured environment. And my answer would be to UCI, whether it's Harvard, Yale, UCI, Cal, Stanford, there still is a disconnect between what is being taught and how it's being taught, and then what the world actually expects and requires of you. At least in medicine, I see that.
So one of the things I was going to add is that I can't speak for the country or internationally, but I know here in Orange County, CEOs really want talent to stay here. Mm-hmm. And there are very enlightened CEOs in Orange County that want to learn and understand and how they can have more people from that have been going through UCI, for example, be part of their companies and help them, attract more people to want to come and work and thrive and get involved in Orange County. So it's a great time to, if you have a company in mind, to go out and ask, apply, use your networks to make those connections. So, but there is something bigger that's going on here. I think about the community coming together. And I think another bright spot, and I tend to be more on the optimistic side of everything, is the niceness. Is that there's a lot of talk in terms of organizations about purpose. And I think as women, hopefully everyone cares about this, but that is a big driver now in terms of culture. And so coming into an organization and bringing that spirit of how not just for the widgets that you produce or whatever technology you're creating, there's also this opportunity to improve society in whatever way that is, whether environmentally or for humanity, whatever those things might be. So it is a really good time to be your authentic self and go out and use the background. People respect UCI so much. So I think it's a great time. I'll just go back to my past that if I think about stories, and I'm hoping this is true, and I don't know if I can validate it in any studies or whatever, maybe there's something there, but I always felt like it was going to be hard as I grew up the corporate ladder because I knew the boards and all of that were of a certain age where they didn't have other strong women role models in their lives. And
True.
so their wives didn't work in normal cases. In most cases, their daughters that, they had not thought of them going out in the careers. And I do think that there's a change. I work with a lot of men. I see, we work with many, many companies here in the work we do to help improve life in Orange County. And, most of the CEOs that I'm meeting with or the C-suite, their wives work, their daughters are telling me about the careers their daughters are in. They want women to be more successful than ever. So there's also, I think, that going on. I don't know if it's manifested itself completely yet, obviously, which I will then go back to the thing I've repeated, I think, every time, is that when you join whatever is, you have to do the work, right? You have to do the work. You have to have some kind of results to show the benefits that you're bringing to the organization. And maybe that's both the tangible results of whatever your job assignment is, but it's also the bigger picture of how you're helping that company move along with their purpose. There's probably a cool combination that you can really rally around right at this particular moment in time, because it's kind of unique. They need, companies need talent. You have talent. Companies need people that are authentic. They like that. And companies want people who share their vision of purpose. And so it's a good time.
Yeah. I just want to build on what Susan was talking about, because, and I'm going back to this idea of this unconscious or hidden bias. And I've seen it. I think it's very real, but from a corporate perspective, I spent my whole career, I've worked 35 plus years in corporate environments. I did similar to what Susan did. I've climbed the ladder. And I think that, there just still is this, statistically, I saw a study, it's just so disheartening, but statistically, if there's a pool of final candidates and one is a woman and two are men, statistically, research has shown that the woman has 0% chance of getting that job. 0. If there's 2 women in the pool, not 2 out of 3, but if you have 2 out of 4 or whatever, just that one additional woman says, okay, this position, the norm of this position could be male or female. But if you only have one, people default, the decision makers default to this notion that, oh, this is really risky to put a woman in this position. And, the male role is the default here and it's the norm. And I don't want to take that chance. So there's just a lot of things like that. Like I said, there's no malice to it. It's just they default to these things. And so I just have seen in my own career, and I have personally benefited from this. I really am a big advocate of coaching. I really believe in coaching. And I would say to every young woman in this audience, or every older woman or a certain age in this audience, find somebody in your organization that can be your coach, that will understand you, get to know you. And I'm talking about something different than mentoring, because mentoring, a lot of companies have mentoring programs. And mentoring is really great, but mentoring tends to be helping people, but particularly women, succeed in their current job, helping them get successful in their current job. I'm talking about coaching, which is much more aspirational, which is saying, okay, how do I get to the next level? What are the gaps that I have that you can help me overcome? And have this coach be someone in the senior ranks, someone in the inner circle that basically then becomes your advocate. So then when an opportunity does open up, one, you're prepared because they've helped prepare you and help you identify how you can be better prepared. But 2, they can throw your hat into the ring for you and say, hey, we really should think about Carrie. She's been doing this, this, and this. And like Susan was saying, tangible results, but also she's got great leadership, or people love her. She's inspiring. She has low turnover. She's collaborative. She's, all the soft skills, because women tend to be whole brain leaders. They use the hard skills and the soft skills. And it's something that really can benefit organizations. And I will say it doesn't really matter. I've heard a lot about women helping women, and I believe in that too. And in fact, I'm coaching 5 women right now myself. But I was coached by men. I lived in an all-male environment for almost the entirety of my career, and I met some amazing men who have really help me transform and get to where I wanted to, but they also were advocates of mine and kind of helped me get to those next levels. So, and then I would also say just women making sure that you are always being consistent and clear about exuding confidence, and then also, making your ambitions and your aspirations known. Because a lot of women work really, really hard and hope to be discovered, or hope they're going to get that promotion, and they get disappointed when the guy in the next office gets it. I will tell you, I saw this time and time and time again. Men are very confident. And, there's a lot of alpha dogs in corporations, and men are very, very confident. In some cases, have an inflated sense of self. But confidence also can be really misinterpreted by the people making the decisions on promotions as competence. They often think confidence is competence. And that's why you see a lot of incompetent people getting promoted.
I agree with that.
So I would just say, make sure you're consistently exhibiting confidence and behavior, because a lot of women, and I'll be, of a certain age, like myself, I was taught to be, humble and, do really work hard and succeed. And I was raised in a great family. I had great parents that told me I could do anything I wanted to do. I always believed that from day one. But also to also be gracious and humble. And back to your point, one of the notions I want to dispel for sure is women need to act like men to succeed. Please don't ever do that to yourself. I mean, I'm living proof. I did it my way. I achieved a lot of everything I wanted to achieve, and I did it my way, and I was true to my values, and I didn't have to think or act like a man. I was able to do it on my own terms. And I think that's, critically important. In fact, the studies have shown that women are just more effective leaders because they are whole brain leaders, and they use both sides of soft and hard and their technical skills, and they bring a lot to the party. And so I think if you have an advocate in your company, if you can get into a coaching situation, please seek some of those people out. And some of it's just raising your hand. I've had over the years, many, many people approach me and say, could I have coffee with you once a month? I would like to talk about my aspirations. And I always say yes. And then I think if that happens and women start getting into the ranks at a more accelerated pace, because while there are bright spots and things are changing, it's at a snail's pace. It's going to be 200 years or 500 years before we really see women at 50% of where they should, of the leadership teams. So
can I add one more thing to what you just said in answer to this question? Because I love that study that you mentioned about 2 women in the pool, right? And the number of your chances of getting hired when there are 2 women in the pool go up by, I think, approximately 79% once you add 2 women to the pool. And the reason I'm so happy you mentioned that is it goes back to we as individuals have to do some of the things that you mentioned, right? In the workplace, we have to talk about the successes that we've had. We have to, so all the things that you mentioned that we as individuals need to do, we do need to do. Even equally important, though, are the things like at your own institutions, how will you make sure that hiring committees ensure diversity in the pool? How will you get more women into the pool in the first place? So these aren't the individual actions now. These are the structural actions that your companies, your institutions should take. Or, biologically, if we want to have children, we're the ones. So, and then I know that there's so many, I've heard, I should say, companies that say, women, in fact, in leadership positions who have said to me after a talk that I've given, an implicit gender talk, that's all great, everything you say, but I'm concerned that if I hire a woman, there's going to come a time that she's going to take time off to have a child. What am I supposed to do about that? And so that is a question. What should we do as an institution, as our business about that? Because it is true, we are the ones who have children. So what does that mean, especially with technology today? You don't have to be in the office to do an incredible job. So what are your companies doing to allow opportunities for women who might need to take some time off when they have their children? That's what I mean by these institutional questions, because otherwise we will always be hurt, right? Someone else mentioned the hiring of the people you know. Another CEO said to me, the reason we don't hire women as much as we do men is because women don't tend to play team sports as often. What?
No, that's true.
That's why
Number one, that is not true.
That's why Title IX was so important.
Right,
There was a
exactly.
point of
But that's another structural thing, right?
Exactly.
So thinking structurally, what are the changes we can make in our own institutions? Let's think about those things, because we have criteria for promotion. And sometimes it is more difficult for women to meet those criteria just because of the things that we do. That's what I mean by the structural changes that need to happen. So of course, individually we can do things, but structurally is more important. More women in the pool, Title IX, right? Things like that create these opportunities for us.
For those who don't know, Title IX is where now schools have to spend as much money on women's sports as they do on men's sports, so women could actually have teams to play on, etc.
I just have to add in a small thing about that, because I was a student athlete in college, and it was the most disheartening thing in the world to me when I found out that our entire budget for our women's team was less than the tape budget for the football team. And I'm like, what? Like, how can that be? And so Title IX was critically important for women's sports. And now you hear all the backlash of that, where, men's sports are getting canceled because they can't afford to fund the women's teams. But
yeah, well, too bad for them.
That's crazy. Yeah, I'm just saying that's crazy. There's always a way to do it. And if you can't solve it yourself, get some women on your leadership team. I'm pretty sure they solve it for you.
My sister is a congresswoman, and she is the woman who plays on the men's hardball team, baseball team. The Republicans play against the Democrats, and she wears the Roman numeral 9 on her jersey. Right.
Cute.
See, I'm a pre-Title IX, even though I played sports because my dad, but she's a post-Title IX. There was a big amount of difference in the amount of money that they spent on the sports in schools for her than they did when I went through. But the interesting thing is that 3 of the last 4 or 5 years, except for one time when she had a bad knee or she had an operation on or whatever, she was voted MVP of that baseball game.
That's so great. That's so
May
great.
I make one comment? Judy Rose Nur and I talked about this a decade ago when, she was just so impressive. And I had written this book on stress, and we talked about the function and structure of the corporate world, to your point. And to your point, I don't think that business was designed to exclude women per se. I don't think anyone thought about women. So the operational structure was very acceptable and facilitative of male success because it was designed by men.
Exactly.
And Judy and I talked about this because, to your point again about women using all parts, different pathways in their brain, there are stress scientists who believe that in women, fight or flight is not the default stress reaction. It's something that Dr. Taylor from UCLA has coined, tend and befriend. And again, not to go too far down the anthropology trail, which is where I live, it makes sense to me that women's survival required collaboration. And for women to collaborate quickly, they needed to understand facial signaling, body language, all sorts of soft EQ things. Again, we can pat ourselves on the back for that, but we didn't choose that any more than men don't have that. It's not like men are saying, I want to be simple-minded and narrow. But their brains...
just born that way.
Yes. Their brains literally move that way in stress. But here's the reason I'm bringing this up. The academic world knows this. There's so much knowledge out there. But again, there's this gap from the academic silos to what's really happening in the world. And the negative of all of this is that for women, when they activate this tend and befriend pathway, if it is unsuccessful, that's not a net neutral effect on them. Biochemically, neurologically, it accelerates their stress pathway. So I do think that's why women at some point say, I give up. You know, they don't find themselves always in a situation where being their best version of themselves is permitted and appreciated. And I think, again, on a practical level, that's why many women step around and say, I'm going to find another way to achieve my goal by being entrepreneurial or smaller scale operations where these very hierarchical way of thinking and functioning aren't as applicable.
You know, to build on that, one of the things I've heard throughout my career, which is another one that really gets under my skin when I hear it, is this notion of women take care and men take charge. It makes you want to vomit. And it's completely untrue. It's nonsense. And, you know, there's been extensive, I think Harvard Business Review, there was an article published in there. They did 30 years of research to identify the 16 traits of great and effective leaders. And women outscore men on all of them except one. And it did reinforce the notion, to your point, that women have succeeded by being collaborative, by being better communicators, by inspiring others, by building relationships. They do it a different way. But the interesting thing is the gap on two of the metrics that women outscored men on the highest were taking initiative and driving for results. That is women taking charge. So they're doing both. And, you know, that's one of the things that I really want to dispel. And I've spent a lot of time in my career trying to dispel. I've heard it, you know, it comes in forms of, you know, well, she can't do that job. She wants to be liked. Oh, dear God, please. You know, there's a lot of ways to be successful, you know, and you can do it, you know, Susan, you did it your way too. I mean, you didn't have to transform yourself. Just be true to who you are. But I also say, you know, get those coaches. I also am a big fan of the legislation. I mean, I really think we have to move it at a faster pace, and legislation where it's forcing, you know, more women, you know, to the industry to gender balance boards and get more women on boards and in the C-suite. And all of those things are really, really positive. And I really think all of those things collectively have to happen. There's, you know, a mindset change. There's coaching available. I think, you know, legislation in my industry, you know, the Me Too movement was a big step forward in terms of progress, women showing that, you know, bad behavior and more importantly, criminal behavior is just not going to be tolerated, and they're taking back the power. You know, of course, you know, that's a panel in and of itself. I think I'm not going to go into it, but in terms of progress and things that I see happening in the industry that are profound and could make a difference and could help accelerate things. I mean, since that's happened, I can't tell you how many times I've been in a boardroom and heard someone say, well, maybe we should consider a woman or someone, you know, of a different race, you know, because the optics on that are better. You know, it's not genuine. It's not giving people, but you know what? I don't care how we get there. Let these people get in there and succeed, because they are going to succeed and they are going to bring a lot to the organization. But, you know, I'll tell one short story. Tell us. I was working in a company, and I mean, to the point we were saying earlier, statistically, how just the deck is sometimes stacked against diversity. And again, you know, not with malice, but I was working in a company, a C-suite position opened up. The head of HR, who's the chief human resources, happens to be a man, came to me and said, "You're going to be so pleased. Our search firm is going to be an all-female recruiting team, and they have a mandate of finding a female to sit in that role." And I said, "Excellent news. I couldn't be happier. I'm proud of this step forward." So fast forward, months go by, and lo and behold, I see an announcement, and they put a man in the role. And I'm like, so of course, I can't keep quiet. So I go back to HR and I say, the head of HR, and he's a, talented, really great guy. And I said, what the heck happened? And he said, well, we presented, 3 finalists and there was a woman in the pool, but it didn't go her way. I mean, it's a classic case, again, of this unconscious bias or these things that we're talking about. I mean, and then I read that study about if you only put one woman in a pool of 3, statistically, 0% chance that she's getting the job. I saw it, lived out in my own world. And I just, these are the things that we really, really have to change and accelerate, and whether it's legislation or coaching or unconscious bias training mandated in companies, just there's a lot of things that I think steps we can be taking, especially corporately, that really will make a difference and can help us.
Well, I think one of the things, and I'll go off of what Stephanie and Carrie were saying, is that and Loretta lived this world so literally, as you go to the rise to the top of the corporate, it just becomes more political. And if you aren't savvy, or if you don't want to play that game, if that's going home every night and you're stressed, it's a dichotomy of who you are because you're trying to figure out always one step ahead and who's doing what and who's talking here. There is that, and it's reality for everyone. There's a lot of stress going on because as you get to the top, it gets really narrow. Who gets to get picked? Mm-hmm. So being savvy and hopefully the coaching and all that, helping people play the art of that corporate politics or whatever it's called these days, I think is really key if somebody really wants to go to the top, because it's not always friendly in terms of the games that are being played.
But the interesting thing is women are much better at building those allegiances. And they are much more politically savvy, a lot of times, because they know in order to succeed at the very top, you have to have the right allegiances. You have to be aligned with some folks. You have to find your people, and they're just much better at building relationships and being a team player and doing some of those things. And so, it really does help women, but you're right. You have to be smart about it. You definitely have to be smart about it. You have to be political.
You might be doing all that, but what's going on behind the scenes of you isn't necessarily.
I don't think success is casual. When people say things to me, you're so lucky. And I think I am lucky, but I also have worked very hard and, X, Y, Z.
It wasn't all luck. Well, it wasn't any luck.
I was thinking.
You made your luck.
In some ways, true. I was thinking about, I have 3 sons, and our middle son is quirky, bright. And when they were little, I used to run home every night to tuck them in, even if I had to go back to labor and delivery. And he was little, 2nd grade, 3rd grade. And whenever he had something meaningful to tell me, he addressed me in the plural, mothers. I have no idea why, but I knew when he called me mothers, something important was coming out of his mind. And he says, mothers, I'm so happy you're home tonight to tuck me in. I said, why? And he said, I've been thinking about something all day. I said, what is that? And he said, you and I are a lot alike. We think a lot alike. I said, I think that's true. But he tells me, I am going to have a much better life than you. And I said, why do you say that? I mean, I don't even know where this is coming from. This is not the one, by the way, who say you're lying to me. This is my 2nd son now. And I said, what do you mean by that, darling? And he got very serious. And he said, because what the world admires in a man, they despise in a woman. And that has haunted me to this day, because first of all, it's a very weird thing for an 8-year-old to be thinking about. And secondly, I mean, as my son, I felt it was some kind of comment. And interestingly, he has had an easier life. He went to Yale. He has worked for some of the most successful, brilliant business leaders in this country. And I am pretty convinced if he were my daughter and not my son, his rise would have been more slower. And, I'm proud of my son. Yeah. But I recognize that as a very young boy, he saw this gender difference.
Yeah. When it played.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that, going back to Nancy Pelosi, which I'm a very, very big fan of. When I first got to the Congress, we had somebody in leadership, in the Democratic leadership, and he decided to get out of the business. And so we were left for a couple of years with nobody from California in the Democratic leadership in the House, which is really hurt us. We're the largest delegation. We're about 48 Democrats go back to the House now. It's like a quarter of what's going on there for Democrats, right? And we didn't have anybody in. So there was a guy who was the next guy in line, George Miller, very great guy from Northern California. And I said to him one day, maybe I'd been in the Congress 6 or 7 years. And I said, we really need somebody in the leadership. I said, you're the next one. You're the dean of the delegation. And he said, no, I'm not going to do it. I go, well, then, what are we going to do? Sam Farr or somebody? And he goes, no, we're going to put Nancy. And I said, oh, great. I said, let's start figuring out how we do that. And he goes, no. He goes, she doesn't even know yet that we're going to put her in leadership. Right? So she didn't start out with this whole idea that she was going to lead, right? I mean, she was a leader, mind you, she was, but she didn't have this mind that she was going to be the Speaker of the House, right? We thought it up for her. So we convinced her of it and everything. And then, we had this little game plan. I said, okay, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to throw a dinner over at my house. I'm going to invite the friends that I have, like 14 or 15 of them. We'll plant a few who are already with us and this whole thing, Californians, right? And we'll start talking about things and we'll start getting the votes because you get voted in. So if you have like 200 Democrats, you need to get 101 votes, right? So we started this, so I would go to her every week. I would say, okay, should I start inviting my friends? Not yet, Loretta, we're not ready yet. And every week, Nancy, let's, we can't like wait for this. And the election, we saw it coming up. The election was like a year away, the internal election, for when there would be a spot open and we would be able to, put her into leadership to start her rise to the Speaker. And finally, one day she said, okay, it's time. So I did my thing, had 14 people over. We got 9 yeses that night. There we had them squared away. Next week, I did another thing, invited some more friends, got 7, whatever. After about 3 or 4 dinners, I kind of ran out of really, really good friends in the Congress, right? That would say yes type of thing. Then you got somebody else to do the same thing, so we Californians started doing this thing. So we're going down the line, and about, 4 or 5 months later, it was going to take 102 votes to win, and we already had 105, right? And so somebody says, and Political says to the guy who was going to run against her, Steny Hoyer, who's the number 2 Democrat, Steny Hoyer, word gets out that we've been doing this. Loretta's been throwing dinners, right? And so Political comes to me and they say, we talked to Steny Hoyer, and Steny Hoyer says, you started the race too early. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, who are they to set the rules? Right? We're just doing what we're doing. We're just having dinner with people. But here's the interesting thing. The guys thought they made the rules up. Right? You guys started too early. I said to the newspaper, well, if they had their way, the race would start after they had the 105 votes. Right? So it's institutional. We have to change the dynamic of what's going on. We can't say those have been the rules and they've been the rules forever, and therefore we're going to follow the rules. And that's what this, like you're talking about your industry and all of the dislocation and craziness that's going on, the disruption. Mm-hmm. The disruption is because these people aren't playing by the rules that your industry had set. Right. And so in every industry, we need to disrupt it and start to say, how do we get women there?
Absolutely. It feels like a clapping moment. So I wanted to transition a little bit. I could ask you questions all afternoon, all morning. I do have some guests here who have some questions that they would like to ask you. So I'm gonna call upon a few people who've prepared questions. First, I'd like to see where's Judith Lukomsky? There she is. Judith, would you please ask a question, and then I'm going to repeat it because of the recording.
Absolutely. First of all, I want to say thank you to everyone that's on the panel. UCI for hosting this because this is such an important topic. There's an underlying thread that I feel that we have to address. And the fact is that women make less money. So to change the system, we have to take ownership of our financial literacy and how we negotiate and how we move forward in claiming our financial power. So I'd like to understand from your perspective how you would see that happening today.
Okay, just for the audience, the question is about women earning less, and then how can women reclaim their financial literacy, gain financial tools, and empowerment, to sum up.
So I'll start. Thank you. The work that you do is so impactful too. So I'll just take one aspect of that question. So of course, we as women need to take some responsibility for it. And there's this incredible book that someone recommended to me called Women Don't Ask, and that I encourage everyone to read. So we need to take responsibility for that, but we shouldn't be the only ones, right? So Bill Maurer, wherever he is, right, reducing or eliminating any pay gaps that you had within your school, right? The responsibility also has to be on us as leaders to pay attention to it and then to do the difficult work to make up for that. And so that means we have to do things differently as leaders. One of the things that I do when I negotiate with faculty who we have hired is I'll actually say it to them. I'll say it to our women candidates. I will say that, right? I will say, men ask for all of these things. You should ask. I might not give it to you, but you should ask. No, but right? Because we should communicate that too. I tell them about the book. I say, go read that book and then come back, right? Because I want you to ask. And that might be a weird, strange way of negotiating with someone who's going to come in. And yet, if we take that seriously, we need to do that. And then the other thing we need to take into account is, you keep talking about the unconscious bias studies. I so appreciate that because there's so many, right? Yeah. Including the ways in which women leaders offer less money to women who are coming in. So it isn't that we just point the finger at others. We do it too. And so we need to pay attention as leaders to what we are doing. We need to keep that data. We need to make a commitment to reduce the pay gap. And then you who are applying, you need to do that work too. Right. So I think it's both that to address the very important issues and questions that you raised, Judith.
I will just say, in my personal experiences, just based on my own personal experience, I have seen some progress being made on this front. And I recently heard of, and I'm not even sure I'm supposed to know this, but I actually know one company that's in the Fortune 500 that basically undertook a whole 2 years to basically look at every position in their company globally and compare men and women that are doing similar scopes of work. They may not even be doing the same job, but if they have a similar scope of work and they're in a certain band, to make sure that they were paid equally. And the results found that there were positions that were not, there was a gender gap in the compensation, and the company corrected it. And it cost them millions and millions of dollars. So I will say there are people that are taking this quite seriously, and it's a hard step to take because you kind of have to take it once and level it up. And then basically from there forward, it's easier to maintain, right? But, it's a hard and expensive step to take, but I do see some companies taking it. In terms of, individually, I would say, to your point, women do have to ask. But, I just say people have to ask, but men ask more frequently. So women do have to kind of not wait for somebody to say, hey, you're great, and I'm going to give you this promotion, or I'm going to give you this raise. You have to ask, and you have to go in there. And I would just say my advice is to basically go in there with a very strong case based on facts and performance as to why you deserve what you're asking for, because it's hard to refute if you go in with a really hard case. And I've seen it many times. So the annual increase is going to be 5% this year or 10% or something in that range. And if you go in there and say, well, here's why I think I'm outside the norm, because a lot of it is policy, right? There's a lot of, there are bands. I mean, you get promoted. There's a promotional increase. It's a range, but there's a promotional increase that a lot of, executives like myself have to stay within. I have budgets too. I have to manage budgets. I can't just be, awarding, crazy increases. But for people who came in with a solid case and really put, forward a strong case as to why they should be given an exceptional or out of norm increase, I fought for it, So I think, you have to really, be your own advocate and also, really build a really strong case for yourself.
It would be a wonderful time to use the coaching that you have said to practice your plan of how you're going to broach it to do it in the right way. But again, it comes back to having the body of work that supports that. But I've also seen a lot of big companies, some really big companies are taking this very seriously right now to try to make it level. There is, hopefully will continue right now because unemployment is so low. Companies are reevaluating a lot of those things because they need talent. So It's encouraging.
I think we've raised a generation of women in the millennials who really cannot even conceptualize that they should be paid at anything less than parity. I think where the gap is closing is for women more similar in age to my age who were so happy to even have a seat at the table. And that misguided gratitude allowed women to then say, oh, I'm just so lucky to be here. So I don't want to rock the boat. I don't see that in young women at all. Their attitude is, you're lucky I'm sitting at this table and you're going to pay me for it. So I actually think this is going to be resolved quite quickly.
Yeah. The problem comes in when women don't know that they're paid less than their male counterparts, and that's one of the things that I think is great with technology. We're living in a very highly visible, highly transparent world now. So, when I was younger and coming up, I worked in an all male environment and, there was a point where I discovered I was making, $10,000 less than my male counterpart or whatever. When I found out about it, it was corrected, but it wasn't until I brought it forward, so it's really about how do you get, more transparency. And I think companies are trying to put out there more publicly in their HR.
And one of the reasons
initiatives.
they need to is because of the Ledbetter Act. So that was the first, when Obama came in as president and Nancy was the speaker. So we controlled the Senate, the House, and the presidency. This was in 2008. The first act that we passed, the first law that we passed at the federal level was in January, right after I think he signed it either on the 20th or on the 21st of January, right after he became president, the Lady Ledbetter Act. And this was a woman who had been having the same job as 8 other guys in her company, like for 20 or 30 years. And one day, whatever, she left. I don't know if she got fired or she decided to retire, whatever, but somebody left in her locker a little note that said, such and such and such and such. And oh, by the way, for the last 30 years, you've been paid, 30% less than everybody else, all the other guys who had your same job. And so she tried to sue, and the statute of limitations was gone or what have you. So she was not allowed to do it. So we changed the law. It says you can go back as far as you want. If you found out that you were paid less and you can prove it, that company's going to have to pay you. So that's one of the reasons why companies are really on eggshells about, trying to make sure that comparable positions are being paid in the bandwidth or whatever at the same level. But it really is, I was lucky. I was, for 20 years, I was a congresswoman. So I controlled the budget of my office. And the reality was that I did something different than anybody else did. I paid everybody a a base kind of salary. And then I had a lot of money for bonuses. I'd always get trouble at the end of the year when, I was giving away $80,000 bonuses or $50,000 bonuses to people. But you know what? People did a good job. I incentivized them and they got it. And I was more than willing to give it to them. So, so I was very lucky in that sense, but I was also unlucky in the sense that I had a limited budget. So money can only go so far. But I also did other things for my employees. You can always do other things, like the HR for the House of Representatives couldn't believe the maternity policy that I had for, people who were having babies and, wonder what we had so many babies in my offices, right? Because it was way off the charts. But I thought it was, I've seen the studies. The bonding with the mother and the time that you spend with that child in the first 6 months is incredibly important, So I had very liberal maternity. I had an ability, it didn't come off of my budget, came off of the regular House of Representatives budget to train my people. So I would, we had an incredible ability to pay for graduate school or pay to go and get your BA or what have you. And I would sit down with each of my employees and look at their education and say, what do you want to do? Do you want to finish this? Let's figure out. And I would give them the time to do it. And they still had to perform their jobs and everything, but the ability for them to be able to get an education, to be able to have it paid so they wouldn't have student loans, for example, was incredibly important. And then the other thing that I did, which I wish and I had a couple of bosses who were like this, so that's why I knew how to do it, is that I would tell them, look, this is your work description and this is your work description and this is the minimum of what we need to get done in your job. Right? This is what the people, the taxpayers, are the minimum that they require you to do and what you're doing. I said, if you do that well and you get it done in time and you got extra hours left, those extra hours, let's figure out what you want to do with those extra hours for the taxpayer. So my people were empowered. We became one of the first places. Orange County became the first one of 6 pilot programs to do a human trafficking task force in the United States. We have the top human trafficking task force in Orange County. LA 2 years ago got it started. We've had it for like 12 or 15 years. Why? Because one of the young ladies who worked for me was incredibly interested in the human trafficking issue going on around the world and in, all the way down to Orange County. So, she did her job, but she had this extra time and she started working it. We started passing all sorts of laws on human trafficking. We got this task force in. We became the preeminent task force in the nation that people look at on human trafficking and how to stop it and how to find it and everything. It wasn't because I had this huge passion for human trafficking because I knew about it, but I didn't know about it, It was because she had a passion. And so she got to turn her job into something that she could be even more passionate about to show up for the American people every day. And, I had a guy who did autism. Almost all the laws on autism are written because of the guy that we had in our office at the nation. So, there are a lot of ways in which bosses can work with their people it's not just money or it's if you do have a family, do I have to travel so much? That's incredibly disruptive, So how do we make your schedule work so that you don't have to be the one that's traveling, but you don't get dinged for it in the corporate world? Yeah. So I think there's ways to do it.
Definitely. Could I have Associate Dean Belinda Robnett offer her question, please?
Thank you. This is a wonderful panel and learned a lot from each of you. My question really centers on, I think, focusing on women that don't necessarily sort of fit into, climbing the corporate ladder, or there are many ways that leadership is manifested, and the vast majority of women, frankly, manifest their leadership through working with children in elementary schools, teach gender, so where are women mostly still going into teaching, into nursing, and administrative assistance. It's still a very similar pattern over the decades. We've made progress, and we've made progress in male-dominated professions that still remain male-dominated. And even within professions, we see this kind of hierarchy develop. So if you take medicine, the majority of surgeons are male. Law, corporate law, male. Women go into family law. In medicine, women go into, pediatricians and so on. And so, given that, and that women, and some of you have mentioned this, they actually go, if they're interested in business, they start their own rather than going up the corporate ladder. Even in the university, which we are, yes, a sidewalk away, but not really, because when you look at the administrative leadership, it's predominantly white male, and if you look at the areas in which men are highly compensated, are mostly in male-dominated areas, even on campus. Where are the most women? Where are the humanities? Where are the most men? Et cetera. And there are pay gaps, there are differences across those as well. So given that, not to go too long, but the question here is that, in what ways can they come to try to also to appreciate women's leadership in areas in which they dominate? And what would that look like? And what would the relationship be for rewarding women who are not-for-profit? So women who do go into, they're still doing it. Most math majors are women, but where do they go? To teach. So just thinking about how can we tap into that leadership? I don't these questions.
Okay, so just to summarize for the recording, so there's a lot of gender segregation in the different industries, and women are still predominantly going into a variety, a certain scope of industry. And so how do we foster women's leadership within the industries that they tend to dominate as well?
That's a Sue Parks question.
Thank you. It was delegated beautifully. I was thinking through all of this, and one, I think, and again, many more women are teachers, but we need to celebrate, there's no question, our teachers more, right? And that was going through that. So it's an opportunity for us to think about how do we, bring more visibility to teachers in general, right? Which would help elevate, everyone that's in that, which predominantly is going to help women. And so I'd love to ponder that. I'm not an expert in terms of what's going on in that, but I think there's opportunities for us to make the heroes, the teachers that are heroes in various schools more visible, give them more print in all of the business, magazines and social media that are going on to highlight what effective teachers are doing to bring up the next generation of leaders. So I think there's some recognition that needs to be done. I don't know what all exists right now, but I love where you're going with it. And I think what we want to say, if that is a career you've chosen, it is so valued, and we need to make sure that they know how valued that they are. In the nonprofit world, I feel much the same. And again, I think both of those, they're more on the caregiving side of work. And so you don't necessarily go into those professions for the accolades. But I know recently, we are doing a lot of work in the homelessness space, right? And one of the things that we realized that a couple years ago that the whole community hadn't come together with one common voice to say, we're going to do what's right for humanity and to take care of our homeless neighbors in a way that's humane and that we find a place for people to live, right? At the end of the day, we need to help people find a place to live. And we're in the process of doing that. But what we realize, there are 37 or 38 or many more service providers out there that are doing that work every single day. And they don't get the people that are doing the caregiving. They're actually out in the streets working day in, day out, or as the coach and the case manager of somebody that was formerly homeless, now being housed, they weren't getting recognized. And so we started an unsung hero where we asked all of their organizations to nominate their unsung heroes and gave them visibility and told their stories, had a special night at the Ducks game to highlight, all of the caregivers. We had 400 that we were able to recognize, in a very, very different way. So maybe looking outside the box of how we can do more of that and bring more visibility to these wonderful opportunities that people are leading and maybe not the corporate sense.
But Sue, can I ask you a question about that? Because, I've been very involved in the homelessness issue too, as you know. And because there's such a focus on it, because there are perceived to be a lot of funds now coming in, whether it's through veterans or through state of California or not so much the feds, but people perceive there's so much money moving into that arena. What I've seen is like the sharks, like the guys come in, and they've never been involved with homelessness really before, but now it's a moneymaker. So here they come. And the traditional people who've been in that field, who've been doing a really good job, who've been the nonprofits, some of them led by men, but many of them led by women, are kind of like, not really like, really tapping into what's really the big game of the big monies in that. So, I mean, it's like they're traditionally in the field, but they're not seeing the benefits of the monies that are moving in there. How do we change that? How do we get the women to be the ones who are driving that versus, sort of like these guys coming in? Do you see what I'm saying? I mean, that's what I typically see happen, even like in charter schools too. You have the public school teachers and they're working really hard and everything, and they're working at this level. And then you got these charter schools and they're moving in and they're sort of like, where there's money to be made, there's men. Where are the women? How do we do that?
And I think you're, if I'm, making sure I understand, is that, so like our focus is on ending homelessness. And there's really two ways to do that, is to build, which I think is what you're talking about, build new units, permit supportive housing and more affordable housing. And so money's coming in to build, is I think where you're getting into some of the development and things going on. And probably Laura Archuleta, who's fantastic, who leads Jamboree Housing, is a very, very strong women leader in that space. And I think Jamboree is one of the biggest. And one of the housing trusts is housed under Lucy Dunn, as part of the collaboration with OCBC. So there are some efforts going on. I think, again, there's some building money that's being shifted. But I'll tell you a wonderful woman's story is that one of Kadi Petrie-Norris's team members came and was listening to what we're doing to activate private apartment owners to be part of the solution and homelessness. And keep in mind, there's close to 500,000 apartments in Orange County. And so the number to end this is a very small number, because at the end of the day, it's a few thousand units. So we created a program to make it a positive for a landlord to be part of the solution, right? Mm-hmm. And created Welcome Home will see a part of that. Well, Kadi had one of her people, when we talked about it, just the inaugural point, Kadi came to our offices, what can we do? And we said, well, here's the numbers on veterans homelessness. And she went back and got a state grant. And it came back. So collectively in this community, we can end veterans homelessness within a year. And that was all kind of coordinated by women. So again, there's some bright spots, but I think you're talking specifically on the building side.
Well, even the operational side, people who operate, they're moving in, they're operating, I think, maybe not for the real reasons that women who traditionally have been in the field may be.
Yeah. And I think at the end of the day, again, we're focused on the humanity side, but I realize there's always the other things going on in play, right? In terms of what's happening. So at the end of the day, for us, Orange County will win when we end homelessness. And there'll be a variety of different solutions that make that happen.
The reason I read history so much and anthropology, biology, epigenetics is exactly in thinking about the question the way you're asking it. Why do women still today gravitate to nursing in large numbers? Why don't they want to be surgeons? And it's not that they can't. And one thing that I've seen in medicine, which is the area of my life's work, is women today don't feel they have to be nurses. This has been a big change. They choose to be. And the problem in medicine is actually the opposite of what people think. We're going to not have enough doctors because, for a lot of reasons way beyond the scope of this panel, but the bright, bright women that I know going into medicine, almost all of them are choosing to be nurse practitioners or PAs. They don't feel compelled. They feel empowered to say, I want a career, I want a manageable career, and I intend to be a mother and have a spouse. And I've made a very informed decision. And so I think we're seeing some of that. And also to Sue's point about teaching, I do think women, not at the exclusion of men, tend to be more cause-driven. And it is historically, biologically, been in the purview of women. Now, my husband's a great parent. I used to say when we were young, if one of us had to be left with the kids, he probably would have coped better than I. But that didn't mean that he mothered them. He parented them in a different way. So I think some of these battle lines are not as pure as we try and reduce them to. I think there is choice among women to say, I think I could be this, but I'm going to be okay being this because it allows me to do this. And that is not in any way critical of women who want to go to the pinnacle. They should be allowed the right if they have the skills and they deliver the product and they are consistent. So I think that, women, in my reading from any time in history, have actually never been more empowered to have choices that are really theirs. That doesn't mean that, we've solved it all. I'm not naive, but I'm very optimistic. Maybe I'm nice too.
That's a very wonderful point. And I think that's where I'd like to have us. We're running out of time, unfortunately. Again, I could stay here all day, but I think people have other things to do. So what I'd like to do is take this opportunity to have each one of you, let's end on that positive note, that optimistic note. Can you give me the one thing, one sentence, something that gives you hope when you think about women in leadership?
A week or so ago, and I know Loretta knew her well as well, an amazing woman passed away, Frida Kaplan. As everybody know who Frida is, Frida's produce. So the next time you eat a kiwi or some vegetable or whatever that wasn't kind of grown native here in in the United States, Frida is the one that brought it in, and she stepped forward in I think the early 60s and was the first woman that created a produce company. The thing that I learned from Frida, and she passed away at 96, to the very end of her life, she was interested. She listened. She made the people she was talking to feel like they were the only person in the room. And I've been inspired since hearing, going to her memorial. And these were her words: never badmouth others. Always listen to the whole story. Be a voice in your community. Be politically active. Vote. Speak up. And I think about, I've been just carrying it with me. So I thought I would share it all with you, because while I get optimistic, somebody at 96 was still pushing the boundaries, interested in everybody, and we can all be better because of Frida.
Can I just say ditto?
Yeah, I know. That's a tough one to follow.
No, I'll just add one more sentence. What gives me hope is a room full of people that come here, like all of you, to discuss all of these important issues, because we're bringing these issues front and center and trying to figure out what we can do next. And then the other group that I just want to call out, because they inspire me every day, is our students. Right? They are always pushing us with things I would not even have thought of in this space. And so having that, the constant energy of the students who view, as you said so eloquently, view the world differently than we do and really see it in a different way than we might, they, I think, inspire all of us, and they certainly inspire me, and they are the ones who give me hope for where we might be going, because they are the ones who are coming up to be the new leaders.
I'm inspired. Well, first of all, that was beautiful. Secondly, I'm inspired by the young women I work with and the men and my grandchildren, things that, I was young during the Watts riots, the whole civil rights movement. It was a battle. Nobody even thinks that way today. Not no one, but most people in the world don't even consider that as a topic anymore of racial equality. And I think we're right on the cusp of gender equality, gender identification. I think that the world's changing very fast, and I'm optimistic, again, not only for the women having found their voice, but for their male counterparts supporting, and that's too weak of a word. They don't even disagree on any level that these women should have the voice. So I, again, may be naive, but I think we are coming to the last chapter of this gender debate. I think it isn't going to take hundreds of years. I think we're right there.
I'm just optimistic about the time that we live in. I mean, I look at my mother, she's 82, and if she had not had, 8 kids and all the biases and the things that held her down, I mean, she should have been the congresswoman. I mean, she just didn't have the opportunities, the boundaries were just too tight. And, my grandmother was a great woman and a strong woman and did incredible things also. But the reins on her were even tighter at the time. And so we live in a time where, gosh, I mean, my parents are from Mexico. They came here with nothing. They had tons of kids. They're the only parents in the United States that have produced 2 congresswomen. Think about that. It's just an amazing time to come from nothing as immigrants and to, be on a political dynasty, not a dynasty, but, to be up, to be in the history books. And so, and we're women, and so it is an exciting time. I think we're really throwing off these chains that the world has put on us. And the reason that I'm really as excited is that as much as we see it on a day-to-day basis here, it's happening around the world. And it's happening because of all the collective people who want things to be better. As we sit here, just in the last, today, 180,000 people every hour will come out of abject poverty in the world. I mean, the world is getting better. We see all these nasty headlines and everything in the newspapers and on the TV, but the world is getting better. If you lived in the 1800s and you wanted to read a book for an hour at night, it would take you 6 hours of work to buy 1 hour's worth of a candle to be lit for you to be able to read that book. 80 years later, in 1880, to light a kerosene lamp, it was 15 minutes of your work to get you 1 hour of light to read a book at night. Today, it's like a nanosecond of time to get the light that you need to read a book. If all of these people are reading a book or reading their iPhone or reading or educating themselves, because we can, because it's there, because it's at our fingertips, then I think that there's a lot of really, really good things that are happening and that can come from all of that. There is no limit on the ideas that we can generate. There's no limit on the initiatives and the innovativeness that we have as people. There's no limit to that. And the more we invent, the more we're able to invent from that. We just got to make sure that women believe that they can also be the inventors and the innovators. And I'm optimistic about that.
I will just say 2 things. One is, and share a little story, but one is I'm encouraged because having had a 35 plus year career in corporate America, working on some of the biggest brands in the world, I see the best and the brightest coming up through the ranks, and they are largely women. There are a lot of men, good men too, but so I'm excited that I feel like we are on a precipice of like maybe turning a corner, or, just, I think, it's interesting timing. But I'll tell you a little story that just completely rejuvenated me and completely gave me hope. On Friday, I had the privilege of having lunch with my former little sister. I got introduced to the Big Sister, Little Sister program through some women entertainment thing. And so I met this young gal named Daisy Garcia 10 years ago. She comes from nothing. Her parents are immigrants. They both work almost 24/7. She's the first one in her family to go to college. And she said to me, she had the chance to go to UC Berkeley, and she said, I'm really fearful about leaving to go to UC Berkeley because at the time she had an 11-year-old brother. And she said, I'm very concerned that if I leave, who's going to guide my brother? And what if he doesn't make good decisions while I'm away? She said, who's going to watch after him? Because my parents can't, they're working all the time. I have 2 older sisters, but they have families and they have children, and they're on the only thing. She said, what's going to happen to him? And on Friday, when I met her, I hadn't seen her in 8 years. This young woman basically went to UC Berkeley. And I said to her, if you go to UC Berkeley, the best thing you're doing for your brother is setting a great example for him. And I said, being a role model for him will be the greatest thing you can do for him. So she did go to UC Berkeley. She was incredibly successful. She then went to get her MBA in Stockholm. She's visited 26 countries. She's done internships in India and Africa and all over the world. And she is incredible. And she's now just come back to LA after 8 years. And she's starting a brand new job in technology with JetBlue Technology Ventures. And she's about to embark on this incredible journey, and so that gives me hope. And by the way, her 11-year-old brother is now in college.
Oh, that's awesome.
So, programs like Big Brothers, Big Sisters, programs like, everything you're doing, United Way, all these things are incredible. And that gives me hope.
Absolutely. Well, I just can we have another round of applause for our wonderful speakers?
Yeah. Thanks, ladies.
A huge thank you to all of you for coming out and being a part of this conversation. As Song said, this is the hope. This is where we make the changes and come together as a community. So thank you all. I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.